For decades, China has restricted the number of babies that women could have. Um, Now they're trying to change it because 3 years ago they changed it a little bit where you can only have one child. In 3 years, you could have two children. But before that, for 30 years, China said you can only have one child and that's it. Um, Now um, they're they're trying to get a baby boom going because they need children. And during that period, over the last several years, they only had boys. If they had a girl baby coming, the government would make the girl have an abortion uh, and get rid of the baby. They mainly wanted boys because boys could work on the farms and girls couldn't. Uh, Now they're trying to figure out how to catch up from all those years because a lot of their people are getting old and they're all on retirement, Social Security, whatever they get there, and they're too old to have babies, and they went by this baby time where in the Communist Party now is getting a um, lot of yelling and screaming from people because why'd you do this for all these years and cut down the babies to one and cut down the girls completely, and now we're sitting here with a big gap. We don't have enough girls and we really don't have enough children because they could have been born as every other country does along and long, but no. I don't know who thought it up, but China and everybody knew about it. They said, no, all you can have is one child. And if you have more than one child, they would even come and they could try to castrate the husband. And they could set up the mother so she couldn't have any more children. But they could also make the mothers have sterilization operations, which they did. Now, China has 1.4 billion people now. So they have a lot of people, but during that time, when they didn't want any more babies, especially girl babies, there's sort of a gap. And what's going to happen is they're going to catch up with that because they're going to need workers, they're going to need girl teachers, they're going to need girls for a lot of things, and they're not going to have one. They're not going to have them. So 3 years ago, they passed the 2 children limit. So then now they said, okay, you can have 2 children. But that hasn't gone over too good either because they've been so used to hearing one child. I think it's in their head. They're afraid to have 2 children. And now girls are moving up, women, and they go to schools and have careers and things like that. And they're not going back to have more children. They would have if they could have had them when they were younger. But no, the China had a limit on how many they could have. And right now, the China population is growing elder. They're getting older. And older people cannot have children. And they're living longer. And they're spending their money in their pensions. And it's hard to get money when you're older and you only have your pension. So now all of a sudden, they want to take the 2-child limit and move it up. But the question is, will it work? It doesn't seem to be working right now where a girl's going out and having 3, 4 children. It says here the number of women between the ages of 20 and 39 is expected to drop by more than 39 million over the next decade, because all those women they didn't want. When they saw there were a woman, a child, female baby, they want to get rid of it. So it looks like there's going to be a big drop in the women population. It's going to go down to 163 million from 202 million where it was to start with for a while. And so I don't know. They need lessons on fertility. They need a lot of things. And the one-child policy was introduced in 1979 as a way to slow the population growth and booster economic boom that was just beginning. So that's when they had the one-child deal. They said it was all going to be planned birth, and that's what you're going to do. And if somebody tried to have more than one child, there could be violence by the government against the people that were trying to have more than one child. In 1984, they passed a law saying if your first child was a girl, you could have a second child, and you lived out in the country. So they said you could have a second child. Then in 2013, they let some of the families have two children, which we mentioned. And that was effective January 1st, 2016. That's only about a little over 2 years ago. And that year it dropped in 2016, the birth rate, but then the next year, it went up in 16. The next year it went down in 17. So now they're trying to figure out some other angles on how to get these children having babies, because a lot of people now are wanting to look to education. And a lot of those Chinese are real well educated, and you can see it on television, whatever. Now they're saying one recent government study estimates that China's labor force could lose 100 million people from 2020 to 2035 because they didn't have children that were coming up to get into the labor force. Then another 100 million their labor force will lose from 2035 to 2050. Because naturally a labor force, people got to be 18, 19 to work on the labor force. But if there were no babies those first 18, 19 years, there are no people coming to work on the labor force. So frankly, they're going to have huge drops in their, 100 million to 35, and then another 100 million of people working the labor force from 2035 to 2050. And the number of births last year in China dipped to 17 million. There are 17 million babies born.
Wow.
And there were 17 million in 2016. It says the percentage of families that have two children now has climbed from 36% in 2013 to 51% now. But they have that limit, they have that deal on there now where they're pushing. They want you to have as many babies as you can. And a lot of these kids are smart. I see them on television. They're in schools. They're going to Yale. They're going to schools in Canada. They're going all over the world once these children hit 16, 18, 19, and they're getting big time educations, and they're very smart. And at that point, they're not going back to have more children. If they're sitting over there in Yale, which there are a lot of them in Yale, they're in Harvard, they got all kinds of things come out in the paper. They're not going to quit Harvard and go back to China and have babies. So that is a big problem for China right now. And I think the fact that their education has moved so fast, for the children they have, those children aren't going to have more children. And once they get married, then they have a family and they buy a house. And then if they have one kid, they got to send him to college. So it's all, the balloon's getting bigger and bigger. And they're not going back and just sitting there and have a lot of children. So like we said, there are going to be 100 million out of the workforce from 20 to 35, and then another 100 million from 2035 to 2050. Well, let's see what happens in the future. We're going to be watching. Thank you.